So it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker tonight, Mitch Mitchell. Mitch Mitchell is an associate professor in print media at Concordia University of Montreal, Quebec, but he originally is from the Midwest, Illinois, United States. His studio practices encompasses many forms of image and physical production, utilizing prints as core in sculpture, performative, and various installation practices. For the past 7 years, his work has focused on exploring psychologies of labor, stress conditioning, and global shared history, and most recently via the psychological aftermath of the atomic bombing on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Through exploring material culture related to labor and industry, he has been defining his practice as democratic material strata by founding a shared research space titled Democratic Material Lab, focused on a global archive of mundane but problematic materials. His current visual research project, Box Factory and Paperwood, merges sculpture, paper, print, and object industrial design to construct kinetic-based performative sculptures and actions intent on performing for audiences mundane tasks commonly associated with working-class cultures within production industry. He has had a very active exhibition and professional life, and he has exhibited nationally and internationally in multiple solo and group exhibitions, including solo exhibition at the Art Gallery of Nova Scotia, DC3 art projects, Galerie Nicolas Robert, group exhibition at the National Museum of Arts in Quebec, Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, as well as exhibiting internationally in such places as China, Portugal, United States, and Russia. And just end by saying that he is, of course, an MFA from here, so it's great to welcome Mitch back. And so please help me in welcoming Mitch.
Thank you very much. So let's get started. Before this popped up, I was showing a small snippet of a video work of a trilogy of videos. And I'll get back into that in the presentation of where that comes from and where it kind of led me to as I produce the work still to this day. So thank you again for having me. I really appreciate it and giving me time to start a new body of work on here. But basically I want to start off with what I've been up to, going from the whole past history and then all the way to the present. So in this case, burnt copper matches, amalgam, chimera, composite, Civil War era cannonball with the etched official National League Baseball logo on the surface, Mish-Mash, fusion, a counterfeit 1943 copper penny replacing a steel penny, a 1-to-1 scale made with photogravure and real copper, legally counterfeited, soup, blend, a coal scuttle, and made of used copper plates, hand-formed, and dur blocks, melancholia blocks, laser etched with the images of atomic bombings, soup, blend, and finally a paper knuckles made of news of the day, most recent news of the day. So basically a lot of this has to do with what I've been realizing over the past 5 years in my practice, not just image making, but what composes it, what I need to draw from and experiment with. Some of these things I was very unaware of as a grad student and prior to that as well, but even like 4 years after graduating, I was still image making, but not really knowing what the impetus for it was. And a lot of this has to do with me and my interest in really just taking components, ideas, and sort of putting them together to see where what the conflict is, where they dance together really beautifully, and also these mystery parts where it has an openness of language and conversation that can be both conflicting and beautiful at the same time. Objects that have personal relevance, but also cultural relevance too. It's like brass knuckles and so on. These are actually a 1-to-1 scale version of my mother's brass knuckles that she got from her mother after she immigrated from Ireland, because that was what women had to carry on at the coal mine when they immigrated back in the 20s. rough times. So leading into that, so when I came here, I started putting this work together, and I realized, like, I started going through all my images, and I came here, I had this flood of memories come back. And I was like, wow, that was a fast-paced 2.5 years. But what really came about of it, I realized that a lot of the work I made here was really the genesis for what I'm making now, even to this day. And that was basically getting out of my comfort zone, going someplace where I felt that I had no clue what it was, and then see how I react to that, via my body, my sensory motivations, but also interviewing people, quiet talks and conversations, what they reflect on. And that being, when I came here, being from the Midwest Illinois, I had never heard of the tar sands. Never heard of it. I've only been to Canada once before in my life, and that was when I was 10 years old at the Winter Olympics in Calgary. And so I was like, first thing I said, I was like, tar sands, what is that? It sounds amazing. Go there, it sucks. It's horrible, it's dirty, it's polluted, it's sulfuric everywhere. So I basically went and decided to go behind the scenes and stay beyond the safe zone area for 2 weeks. And took a lot of photos and sort of reminisced about it. Tailing ponds, this is actually the tailing pond that all the ducks flew in. I took this photo the day before it happened, not knowing what it was until after I got back. So that's what it kind of lived, very Blade Runner-esque. So coming back, that sort of made a lot of this work that I presented in my MFA. A series of photogravures called Cities of the Prairie. And photographic, started exploring that, merging these sort of synthetic, sort of visceral, strange, oily, alien-esque sort of shapes. Again, just going with my gut on things, but not really knowing where I was happening. And at the time, I was making these via sculpture. I was really just making sculpture and then photographing them and using Photoshop to enhance them. But at the same time, I was still going back and making what I was used to doing in Chicago at the time. This was at an exhibition installation at the old Red Strat building, where Snap used to be, called Tar Plain Wayfarer. And this was something I did while I was here, but I ended up sort of like recalling this later on in my career. And how much I love process, how much I love physically making things, multiples. I love multiples. I could sit down and make 50,000 of one thing and be so happy. And everybody else is like, you are insane. And I actually, that becomes a part of my conversation in the later work. So you can see the scale of it was quite large. I was surprised they let me do this. And lots of newsprint. So that led me going back when I graduated to sort of take a break and then realize what I liked about work. And I realized I like to converge print with sculpture and performance and object and physical space. So this is a quarter-scale hot air balloon made of newsprint. It's been quilted. It's also been silkscreened with rust and oiled. And also it has a apparatus within it, an air bladder, that starts filling and filling the space, and it really detects you. So normally it's dormant, but as soon as you walk in, it senses you and it starts literally inflating. And it's about 18 feet long, I think the idea of scale, and it just goes and goes and goes, and it breathes like a giant lung over and over again. And it makes sound because it's paper ruffling against each other. I heard stories from the galleries that she'd walk in, people would be laying down on the floor while they're listening to it, and kind of some people sleeping to it. So this was like my first sort of like big object I made after grad school, when I was really wanting to like explore these themes of converging ideas, objects. I have this really strong love affair for hot air balloons. I'm from the Midwest. So you see hot air balloon regattas all the time. And I find them to be very beautiful but tragic things. I don't know, this object comes back in my work later on. Recently, because I'm a project-based artist as well, it takes me a long time to make work. Typically for an exhibition, I'll take about 5 to 8 years to make a full body of work, because I like multiples. So the first one was I Will Meet You in the Sun. I was very fortunate to have the opportunity to present an entire exhibition at the Art Gallery of Scotia for the summer of 2014, I believe. And then Democratic Material Works, and also Lab. So I Will Meet You in the Sun was an exhibition sort of focusing on not only, for once, my own personal family and narrative space, but also how it conflicts with global space. So I started making these objects in these boxes. In this photo, there's about 34,000 handmade boxes. They're all individually silk screens. They are hand cut, hand glued on pallets that are made of wax and sort of trompe-l'oeil style. And they've been presented in various forms and shapes. And see these? You see they're all different colors. They're all randomly printed. It's a multiple, not an addition. So there's a variance. And what I was attracted to his idea is something that's very beautiful, it's very opulent. But then when you get close to it, you realize that they're all handmade. And then you realize that an individual made these. And you realize this guy's insane. Sort of I like those tensions, those ideas. And it's something that was kind of working in my brain a lot when I was, during this period of time. I was reflecting on a family narrative that was really affecting me, but also my parents and grandparents' generation. And that was my grandfather's relationship to war and the aftermath of it, how it affected our family. He was a coal miner. He lived a very amazing life. He was an immigrant from Scotland, as well as his wife, my grandmother. So I basically started making objects that would reflect on them: labor and production, manual labor, coal mine, collecting of bricks to make a house, a pallet jack to lift and move things around. This pallet jack is actually made of wood that I've carbonized. So it's actually through the shushugiban technique of Japanese burning, and it literally looks like velvet, but it's actually just pure carbon. And when I made it, it actually functioned and worked. But then now it's really fragile. Also, returning to the hot air balloon, this idea of the fragile and the frail, the quilts. This idea of another act of labor, much more of a sensual labor in regards to the hands and quilting. This is actually a one-to-one scale hot air balloon that I'm slowly constructing for every time I exhibit this. Every time I show it, I add more of these panels up to the top to the piece. And it becomes performative objects because during the exhibition, I will randomly show up and start piecing it together. The story of this piece was when my grandmother was alive, I was a kid, I always wanted to learn how to quilt because she was a quilter. And her response to me was, no, you go build houses, your daughter and your sister and I can quilt together. I was like, screw that, I want to learn how to quilt. So I promised her that one day I'll make her a quilt. So with the idea of this project, I decided to make her a quilt, but it's also a quilt that is a hot air balloon. And on the surface of it is silk screens, basically these half-tone dot structures that are all made of rust. So cyan, magenta, yellow, black. They're all handmade inks made of rust. And because you get rust in different colors, it's how they actually pigment paint. And the way I produced this, so the image actually is a fiery sun, a sky, and on the surface. This is actually the sky that was taken above the house that my grandmother died in, that my grandfather built after we got back from the war. So it kind of was, when it happened, I just had to take a photograph because it was very much her Scottish personality. She's Glaswegian by trade, by blood, so she was very fiery. And so this is sort of like a tome to her, a tome to that generation, that idea, that romance of it. And also the fact that after she got to Illinois, she never left. She never traveled again. She always wanted to go somewhere. But it's also this tragic thing. It's like, this is my version of Icarus in a way. Hot air balloon made of paper. You only get so far, but it's doomed to crash. Also, to make this even more pronounced, like I showed earlier, is that to put it together, I use staples. Something that's very physical. I need something that is also very frail and ridiculous. I'm a really good sewer, but I decided, I felt that wasn't enough. I need these punctures, I need this movement. So I used a hand stapler that would mic up the contact microphone, and then I load it up to a bunch of Marshall amps. So every time I hit it, you hear sound effects. It sounded like bombs going off, or heartbeats, or all kinds of various things. And it became very ominous, especially for the docents, because they never knew who I was. So I would just show up and start doing this, so that was always fun. So in producing this, it just keeps on expanding and contrasting. And a lot of this work has to do with, that's in this exhibition, has to do with a specific narrative I mentioned earlier. My grandfather was a big secret in the family, and it wasn't told us until I was 15. And that was that my grandfather, while he was in the war, he was stationed in the Aleutian Islands and Alaska. And he was the radar operator that was charged with confirming and watching the plane that went over Hiroshima that dropped the bomb. And so that was a very impactful moment for him. He was like really young and didn't know what was going on. He didn't find out until like 4 days later that he was told to keep that confidential. He actually died with that as a secret. My grandmother knew, of course, he's got to tell somebody. So that was like this big thing in my life where this idea of an incident was so global but had such a personal impact on us. It's something like my parents don't even talk about. They're very ashamed of that because it's like, you know, it was like very dark. So, and for him, my grandfather, the one thing he always wanted to do when he returned back from the war was he actually wanted to eventually go back to Japan and apologize. But he never got to do that. So a lot of this work that was producing this exhibition was sort of like me getting to what we, the Scots-Irish call it, getting the devil out, sort of exercising your demons, and sort of trying to find a way of talking about it that isn't so personal, but also kind of mysterious and shared at the same time. And it's also the work that was presented in this exhibition that started this, what I showed earlier, was this video work. Kind of really going into the idea of like your hands are always dirty no matter what. And it's a part of a trilogy of videos. It's called the Trinity Cantos, a nod to Trinity tests. And in this case, basically all three videos explore making of something mundane, something we all know and love, but don't think about. Using materials that we don't think about, that have a very dire impact or a very wonderful impact on our lives. Things that are very charged. I refer to these as democratic materials because they're cheap, they're affordable, they're everywhere, and they've touched everybody in some way, but we don't think of them beyond what they are, what they have historically around us. So, in this case, the video you're presenting with was 1 cup water, 1 cup rust, 1 cup flour. And literally what it is an instruction. It's kind of an instructional video of how to make bread, but with rust. And I've embedded in the videos a series of images or objects that have a certain other kind of potential to them. In this case, a Japanese cup, sort of making nods to that. Flour, which is actually a flour that was introduced to Japan during the war by the GIs. So all these little cues and clues that I'm embedding in the work and so on. I'm seeing a much more industrial version of the same cup, made at IKEA, but using the rust, the actual rust powder that I use to make pigments and silkscreen inks. And literally it's very silent, but there's a quiet soundtrack to it as well. And it gets bodily and more ominous as it's physically making. It's very bloody and very visceral. And eventually, at the end of the film, you see just the raw dough, raw rust dough. But adjacent to that, every time I present it, I actually present the actual objects. So this is, again, this idea of transference, of a chimera of objects that put two things or few things at once. This is an actual loaf of bread made of rust. You can cut into it, it's soft, it's pliable, don't eat it. But it's bloody like it actually is. So can I give a close-up of it? So exactly what you expect. So in this trilogy, I'm sort of conflating a bunch of things, talking about a lot of stuff, and things that relate to, I think, everybody to a certain degree, but also have an impact with my family. And one of the other videos is making a paper coveralls, worker suits that you see in mechanic wear. This is actually the last video I shot of my grandmother as her hands. Those magnificent, beautiful hands. Before she was a sewer, she was a quilter, and so this is I'm really happy because this is actually having its first exhibition in Barcelona right now. So it's great to see this fun getting out there. And the third being making architectural moldings with sugar. Instead of the plaster, actually making it out of sugar. Another material that's has a lot of historical issues and charge in many ways. So leading into that, materials that I use a lot for my practice, I call democratic materials, are again materials that are mundane, things you pass by, flour, rust, water, time, labor, even paper, and all kinds of surfaces you kind of forget about. And things I find to be both intrinsically beautiful, but also again have a dark history to them. And I want to find ways of exposing them in ways. But with that, I'm also thinking about going into my prior degree. Before I got a visual arts degree, I actually got a degree in mechanical engineering. And I never really used that before, but I decided to start playing with that more with my sculptural objects. And this is what led to this new project, out of many, I don't know how to stop working, is paperwood. And I was invited to a symposium for a month to present an idea, and I had this idea for a long time, but never had a reason to do it. So they invited me to go into the public and literally for a month perform a task, an object, or produce artwork. So I decided this would be a great thing. So first thing I did was I went around town in northern Quebec, and I found IKEA furniture on the side of the road. And I just took it apart and then made a press. And from that, it's plumbing supplies and IKEA stuff, and then eventually started just basically set up shop and created a month-long performance where I would just take a newspaper and just cut it apart. And while I'm doing this for 8 hours a day, 7 days a week, all the newspapers are right here, I'll cut them apart and strip them apart. And I started gluing them sheet for sheet, individually. Again, I could sit down and do multiples forever, and I'm just totally zen. And while I was doing this, I would have another chair, so if people want to walk by and say hi, ask me what I'm doing, fantastic. It was also a great way for me to practice my French, because I'm not from Quebec, I'm not from Canada, so it was a great way for me to practice mon français avec le bouillon. So I would sit there and glue, but when people would ask me questions, I wouldn't respond to them. I'd actually just be telling them what happened in the news for the day. So I'd read the paper every day, and sort of, so what is going on? I'd be like, I would just literally just tell them what happened with Trump that day, or what happened with what new cars on sale, Hyundai Sonata, blah blah blah. And it was really disconcerting for them. And eventually got to the point where if I took a break, go for lunch or whatever, I'd come back. This would actually happen. This is Mary Perot. She was actually the curator for it, and she would jump on and start doing the work for me. And it was actually exciting because then she would talk about the projects and what it means, and art making and practice, and people would just sit by and stand and walk around and be entranced by it. And all I was doing is literally just gluing paper to paper to paper. This is a very zen moment. But also people would be looking at me like, you are insane. It's like, what is the purpose of this? Well, the purpose of it was to basically, find a way of activating the news, the daily news structure. What we call trash media. This is the free Metro newspaper of Montreal. And find a way of actually putting it in the public in a way that's different than how we expect to see it on the bus or in the metro stations. And I'll just be laminating and laminating and laminating. Hundreds and thousands of sheets of paper every day. Eventually to get to these small sculptures. So the performative act became a sculptural objects, and more sculptural objects. And these are the planks that came from that. So So I had built up not only the press, but all this apparatus, all these objects, all these machines that would also dehydrate them, press them overnight, and extract all the water using my engineering background. And I'll actually show the actual apparatus, the objects that would draw out all the water and do the pressing. Those became performative sculptures as well. So people would they wouldn't be hidden away somewhere, they'd actually be shown. And you see them funneling all the water out. I'm currently reproducing them now and make actual objects to show so they can be presented in actual exhibitions. Eventually, at the point where those planks would become this. This is what I call paperwood, and something I've thought about for a long time. I want to think about ways of reducing our waste, especially in universities and in the print program, because we produce so much paper and so much waste. So I was always thinking about what can we do to make a circular effect. So how can I, if I can leave anything in the world that can make any kind of relevance, what would that be? So this is actually it right here. So later on, if you want, you can actually feel it. So this is about 1,800 sheets of paper, and it's as hard as maple, but cuts like paper. And so, just to give you an idea of what's possible, just with a little bit of insanity. Okay. So this led me to working on a patent for the project and process. What I envisioned the patent as an art piece as well. But that didn't stop there. So the initial goal of the project was I wanted to use this material to make something functional that would also have a trace to it, have a different narrative, something that would be conflicting as well as beautiful. And that would be a remake of the Louis XVI actual throne chair that is in the Paris Louvre, but on skeletal form. So I took all that wood, the paper wood, and I would just, after it was all dried out and cured like wood is, I started hand forming it, hand cutting it, and shaping it, and making it so that you could actually see a king's throne, and possibly sit in it, but I decided to leave the seat cushions off because I like the skeletal bodily form of it. But you can see in it all the surfaces, the text, information of day. So that sort of like the idea of the political conversations that exist with papers and newspapers, the king's throne, especially right now with Trump era, being from the States, like I'm from Chicago, like we don't like that, so it's a very charged moment. Also, Louis XVI was really important historically because he was decapitated along with Marie Antoinette because he was kind of an asshole. The whole history of this, it was during the French Revolution. The French Revolution really would not have happened unless people could read. And what happened at the same time, presses were available, printing was available. The literacy rate of the people at the time, within 10 years, went from basically 2% of people in France could read to almost 80% because of the presses and the availability of paper. So that was a charged moment of time in history. And the fact that also for the chair as a symbol, I found this out when I was at the Louvre, was he was kind of a jerk. So one of the things he would do is when he decided not to go out and see his people, I don't feel like seeing you tonight. I'm going to send my chair out in my stead. That's me. Goodbye. So he would actually do that. He would actually send his chair out. This chair that no one could sit in but him, and in his place. And so I thought that was just really weird and strange, and kind of we're doomed to repeat ourselves and all kinds of sort of loaded scenarios. So another image of it. So the chair itself was one object of it, but then I had the opportunity of exhibiting at the Musée National de Québec during the summer exhibition of the Canadian exhibition on where craft and art sort of meet up and sort of ask a lot of questions of each other. And I showed it in an exhibition in the shape of this French garden-style labyrinth, which takes over the plinth. And on its surface, on its top surfaces, are all the shavings. Every single cut shaving. I kept everything. The ironic thing was too, is or coincidence, if you want to, I weighed the chair, see how much it weighs. I had to for insurance reasons, and I decided how much shavings did I cut off. The shavings and the chair weigh the exact same. It's just weird. So, but I would show everything like that. And this was floor shape, so you can never see like jamais, you know, and all this stuff. So these artifacts, if you will. And I was able to exhibit it again in another form, another gallery, where I presented it by itself, but behind it were all the shavings, sort of like bugs preserved on the wall. It became very optical, very much like a beautiful wallpaper in a sense, referencing wallpapers of the time. And then, I mean, this is like one of the bigger objects I made. I also made smaller objects, like again, the paper knuckles and various other items of the hand, sculptures of the hand, if you will. So things that are very specific to that narrative history. Another thing that came out of that was the whole paperwood lab, the Democratic Materials Lab, and what I've been doing for the past 3 years is basically create a sculpture facility that is private but also open to the public on certain days in the sense of teaching and learning. Where I teach old school sculpture craft techniques of handworking wood and metal and all that stuff, things that were passed down to me, but also a lab that I could work in myself and sort of really figure out what I can do with these materials. So this is a woodworking section of it, with in the back there's 2 doors. The one on the left is my own private studio, and then on the right is the laser and CNC lab. And then also metalworking area. So it's actually my grandfather's old metal lathe that he saved from the war on the way back from the Aleutian Islands. So it's basically been traced down the family ever since then. It still works like a gem. So I basically use all this stuff to make new sculptures and prototyping and part of the project and the process of things. Which also led to this new body work that I'm starting off called Box Factory. So while I was working on the I Will Meet You in the Sun exhibition, where I'm making all those boxes, I do enjoy making those, but at one point in time, your brain does go into a place where I would love a machine that makes these for me. Because this is insane. I understand my insanity. So I decided to start actually the next body of work that I make, which will be about 5 to 8 years, will be a large-scale kinetic installation of multiple sculptures that will link up, if you will, to create a literal box factory. I want every sculpture to make do a task that will make the most mundane thing I can think of, an Amazon box. And then at the end of the day, throw the box away like it's nothing. So basically, from birth to death, paper to inevitable garbage. The box is thrown away. But every sculpture has its own unique objects. Also, what I decided to do with this work is sort of go back into something I haven't done in a while. And that's why I'm here during this residency and kind of getting back into drawing. Like getting back into drawing, getting back into ink on paper, working with rulers and pencils, and something that I've just been, I've laxed in, I miss. So making these drawings, multiple layer drawings, and starting to work on these again. And then some of these prints as well, think about the factory, how the directions and the pathways, how mysterious can be, the way my brain kind of works at times, the atmospheres around them, just sort of playing around with just shape and density. And this is the first sculpture that I made up for Box Factory. And this is, every sculpture does a task. In this case, the gantry at the top moves a box from one point to the end. But also linked up with it is a task in itself. In this case, it's a DJ station. And I call this boom box. And it's a functioning DJ station. It's kind of like a narrative of my love affair of Chicago. All the records, all the vinyls, it actually plays, it works. It comes with a DJ docent. And so it plays live, because whenever you're working away, you need to have the music, a soundtrack. the vinyls are actually been my own personal collection that I've been collecting from when I was living back home. But they've been reworked, and they're being redone in silkscreen, or been burned into. Some of the records have been glued up, so they only can play one song. So they're very mysterious. You never know what you're going to get. And the DJ part of it, DJ docent, is literally the docent that's in the gallery. Their task is to work and be the DJ of the day. So, which is either you like it or you don't. Kind of like music. So, and with that, I'll leave you with brilliance, absolute brilliance. My boss. All right, that's about it. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Any questions?